Okay, this video might be a little bit longer because it's about writing a conclusion for an investor ratio essay, which is extremely important. So some students will not get to a conclusion or will rush the conclusion, write a couple sentences, and that has a real impact on your grade. If you look at the mark schemes, it's saying about underdeveloped judgment, astute judgment. The higher level marks need you to have a well presented, well considered conclusion. So you've got to give yourself enough time to write a conclusion. Yes, you want some decent paragraphs beforehand, and if you have some limitations and question your evidence, and to be fair, in an investor ratio, let's say every paragraph should be starting to go, oh, it could be company A, this is because their strengths are here. But this is you weighing up all of your evidence to come to a clear and concise judgment. If you give it a couple of sentences, there's not enough evidence to back it up. If you write too much, it's not really concise, and your examiner might be like, okay, you're just throwing everything back at the question again. So you've got to be quite considered. So I'm just going to go through a couple key points that you need to consider when making a judgment. So the first one is the market share of the price. So you've got usually in the question the current market share of a company, and so you can work out how many shares can be purchased, and part of your judgment could be about the fact you can buy more shares in one company than another. But if it's cheaper, does that necessarily mean it's good? So you've got to think about that as well. You've got to think about anything in the scenario that could impact the price. Sometimes you've got ethics or other influences on business performance that could lead to a reduction, or if it's positive, an increase in the value of the shares. PE could be used here, and this is important from a capital gains point of view because you could buy a lot of shares that lose value and you lose all your money. So when we're talking about market price, it's whether we're looking to make money on that share price or whether we go longer term and just accept that there are fluctuations in market price, and if we hold on to it for long enough with a stable company, that is, that we shouldn't be losing money in that way. Risk is really important in the question. So you may not be told the attitude to risk for the investor in your question, and that's fine because that's a limitation then, and that's something you can question. So you can make an assumption as to their attitude to risk. Lots of the people in these questions are retiring, and you could argue that somebody who's retiring may be risk averse and so therefore wouldn't want to actually lose the capital that they're investing. So you can look at safer options, those that aren't likely to close. However, some people who retired, maybe this is just an extra little bit of money that they've got, and so maybe more of a risk taker and aim to generate a higher return. If they've told you in the question, this should be one of the key points in your conclusion because they've told you their attitude to risk, and this could be one of the key pieces of evidence that supports your judgment. So if a company is if an investor is risk averse, you'll be looking at stable dividend yield, fairly low PE, but if they're a risk taker, high PE, potentially lower dividend cover, you're looking at making money quickly. So higher risk option, and I've discussed this in other videos, could indicate a potential higher reward, so like a high PE ratio, but like we've always said, we could lose our investment. So when you're weighing up options, that's something to consider and clearly state. I think risk is always an easy one. And then at the end, if you don't know, you can say, oh, limitation is, if you pick the higher risk option, you could have a limitation at the end of your conclusion, which actually says that. You can say, however, whilst I've chosen the high risk option, if I was aware that the investor, Dave, Barbara, or whatever they're called in the question, was particularly risk averse, then it may have influenced my decision because it may be an unwise choice as they could lose the money. Something like it needs to be obviously a bit more exciting phrasing, but the key point is there. And so when we're thinking about investment choices, so if we're looking at that long-term option, so if you are looking really long-term, you're usually aiming for higher dividends as well. So it's not always, these are just some generalized statements that you could use to support your judgment. So if we're looking for that safe choice that's going to be giving us a dividend time after time, so like that risk averse. If you're looking short-term option, you're usually aiming to sell those shares for a profit, so you're speculating. So you can be reviewing those stocks which you think, or shares that you think will go up in value quickly, and you can flip them and make some money. So you could be thinking about short and long term, but talking about the short and long term is really important in your essays. The examiners like it if you show that you appreciate the difference between the two and how one might be a short term benefit or one might be a long term benefit and why. We could be considering the fact it's an established business and a safer option, like I was saying about being risk averse. So sometimes you have a business that's been trading for 50 years or 100 years in the question. There is an argument they're a safer option. It doesn't mean they're definitely going to continue trading. So we've always got to qualify our language in these essays. We don't go in one clean direction. But a more established business could be a safer option, and that is something that could be used within your judgment. You can spread risk. So as part of your conclusion, you could talk about spreading the risk and diversifying. Now, as an investor, that's clearly a good option because if you put all your money in one business, you could lose it all. So spreading it over multiple options can be a good choice. I'm always cautious on saying this because if in your conclusion you basically say, I'll put a little bit of money in both, I don't know really, are you making a clear judgment? I don't think you are because you're not choosing anyone, and so therefore are you really showing those higher level judgment skills? If you added that as a limitation, so you could explore that and explain it, maybe, but you've got to be careful. Just the same as with other options. Again, it could be a limitation. You've only been given usually two options. Are there other companies that could invest in that industry who could, or other industries that could make a higher return? You can say that, but I think I'd qualify as limitations. I just think that sometimes where students try and do that, they're sitting on the fence and it's no clear judgment. So the structure itself, just be really, really clear. So your first part, your conclusion should be, in conclusion, I feel that Dave should invest in company A. Straight away, done. Then you're going to pick what you feel are the strongest pieces of evidence to support it. So you'll say, this is because. Now, this is where you bring in one of the ratios. This is where you bring in evidence from the case study about the business and links into your key decision making. So is it about risk? Is it about return on investment in the short or long term? Why does these figures back it up? Why is this important? And then, and this is where you've got to be careful, compare it to the other option. Not to say, oh, but the other option is a good one because you've been doing that in your paragraphs. This is a judgment now. This is a clear and concise choice. But you should be saying, this is better than the other one because their strengths are here and this is not suitable for this investor. So if you were looking for one that was safer with dividends, you could say, however, we're not going to choose project B, has a high PE ratio, so potentially could make a high return in the future, but this is a risk that Dave doesn't want to take with his money. Something like that. But you've got to be saying, this is why we choose this company. These are the key reasons why. However, we don't want to choose this company because this isn't that important to this particular investor. Limitations, anything you don't have. The more limitations you've got throughout your essay, the higher your mark will be, but you've got to use them. If you're going to put limitations in there, you have to say how it would influence your judgment. So if you say at the end, I don't know, if you don't know gearing levels, and say, why would gearing influence your judgment? Talk about risk and how that could affect the going concern ability of that business. That could be a limitation. Previous year's accounts, because obviously usually you only have 1 year's figures. Future forecasts would be more important because you've only got historic data. So where do we think the business is going to? You've got to think about limitations. Limitations not in there, you're going to have an issue. And also, so limitations, wider context as well. So both of those need to be in your essay within the paragraphs, and it would be highly recommended to try and consider something in the conclusion. So whether that's to do with the industry that you're potentially looking to invest in or not invest in, but something that shows you have thought about a number or several reasons to support your judgment. Okay, a good, clear conclusion really helps the examiner. It's the last thing they're looking at when I'm marking a question. I'm going through it and go, yes, this is brilliant. And then I see a quick conclusion and it's already dropping the levels down because I cannot give you a high mark without a strong conclusion. Whereas sometimes an essay could be, it's okay, it's all right, nothing too exciting, then the conclusion is really good, and that boosts my markup. So the last thing you read, it's one major part of the mark scheme. So practice writing good conclusions.